we simply don't know what is being worked on.
It's not entirely clear there will be a summit in the immediate offing.
And frankly, North Korea has not even officially issued any sort of statement.
South Korea's President Moon Jae-in suggested that a three-way summit may be possible.
I think it's too early to talk about a three-way summit.
His comments suggest that he was strongly advocating a preventive war against North Korea.
This is not going to be some reckless team. It will be a hard-line team. It will be a very serious team.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's upcoming meeting would be a historic first. Will President Trump be able to solve the decades-long nuclear problem and secure lasting peace with North Korea?
North Korea, we'll see how that happens.
That's the goal, is to get them to give up their nuclear program, to get them to abandon their nuclear program.
We need to determine pretty quickly if Kim Jong-un is serious. And by serious, I mean, is he willing to get rid of his nuclear weapons?
진전 상황에 따라서는 남북, 미 3국 정상회담으로 이어질 수도 있을 것입니다.
Now my guest today, Mr. Patrick Cronin, Senior Director of the Asia-Pacific Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. Mr. Cronin spent more than 3 decades in the U.S. government and think tanks, focusing on Asia security and foreign policy. Also joining us today, Ms. Balbina Hwang, professor at the Georgetown University. Professor Hwang was a former State Department senior advisor. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Professor Hwang, let me begin with you. It's only 2 months to go until the planned summit between North Korea and the United States. And the Trump administration preparations are underway far from public view. What would the officials be working on right now?
Well, these sorts of negotiations certainly should be actually from public view. There's all sorts of details that need to be worked out, security-wise, protocol-wise, but obviously, most importantly, agenda-wise. We simply don't know what is being worked on, and frankly, North Korea has not even officially issued any sort of statement. Which is rather mysterious.
So is it usual that the government don't really update on what's being prepared right now?
No, I don't think so. Governments usually don't provide such updates necessarily. And security is also one of the major concerns, even among allies. So one can imagine what the security issues might be like among 2 countries that have never spoken at this level in 60 years.
Mr. Cronin, the Trump administration is showing cautious optimism, not making much public comments about the upcoming summit. What do you think of such cautiousness?
Well, there are a lot of steps that have to be taken before we even get to a summit. It's not entirely clear there will be a summit in the immediate offing. I wouldn't be so sure about it because the first step for the Trump administration was to confirm and to validate what the South Korean government told President Trump and his administration about North Korean intentions. Obviously, American negotiators want to hear that firsthand. They want to narrow down what that means with respect to the agenda. Then they have to determine a date and a venue. And all of those issues have to be decided in relative privacy. And at some point closer to an actual summit meeting, I'm sure we will get briefed on this.
At this point, it seems the direct channel between U.S. and North Korea are not working yet.
Well, actually, I think there are always back channels to North Korea. Establishing a direct face-to-face discussion with the right interlocutors is a challenge in the case of North Korea and the United States. But it is something that a lot of officials in the U.S. government are working on. And I'm sure North Korea, as it prepares for meeting President Moon, and as it then prepares for a possible summit meeting with President Trump, is also very busy thinking carefully about every step of how they want to orchestrate summit meetings.
Professor Hwang, the big news this week was the naming of Ambassador Bolton as the new National Security Advisor. How would such nomination impact the upcoming summit between North Korea and the United States?
Well, again, as my colleague here said, I think that we have to be very careful. We still don't even know if the summit will take place. And I think even before we can speculate about a U.S.-North Korea summit, actually the critical summit will be the South Korea-North Korea summit. And frankly, that will really set the stage. And so I think we have to stop speculating so much and reacting immediately. You know, John Bolton apparently was surprised himself when he heard that he himself was nominated so quickly on the air.
Mr. Cronin, wouldn't National Security Advisor be in a critical position in preparing for the upcoming summit?
Well, the administration is big and it has a lot of key players. The actual work is mostly done at the mid-level and below. And many people forget that when we think about the principles involved. But obviously, a new Secretary of State who will have to be confirmed, Mike Pompeo, he's not going to be confirmed in at least until mid-April and maybe even into May. Who knows how long that will take. A new National Security Advisor doesn't require confirmation, so the President has announced that on 9 April, John Bolton will become the National Security Advisor. John Bolton has been watching these issues very closely, so it's not as though he's been out living in the sort of middle America, not following these issues. He'll be steeped. And in fact, H.R. McMaster, the outgoing National Security Advisor, will stay on a week to make sure he's briefed on every intimate classified detail as well. So I think there'll be a lot of continuity, but the National Security Advisor is the President's trusted advisor on a daily basis. As Mike Pompeo was as director, and still is, director of intelligence at the CIA, he's a daily briefer for the President. So I think the President Trump will be relying on people he's actually been listening to a lot, just not necessarily in the positions they're going to be playing in April and May and beyond.
Mr. Cronin, you just mentioned that Ambassador Bolton has been following the North Korea issue very closely in the past years. And his comments suggest that he was strongly advocating a preventive war against North Korea. Just last month, he issued a column saying that a legal case for a first strike against North Korea. So how would such his past stance impact or influence the minds of the president?
I served in the same position that John Bolton served in at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and he very generously reached out to me. This was during the George W. Bush administration, and gave me great advice about how to prepare. The man is an inveterate sort of note-taker. He focuses on the mission at hand. He thoroughly prepares his legal brief. He is a lawyer, and he is, while he is on television, he likes to throw out provocative lines. His legal advice is actually much more careful. So, for instance, the idea that he supported preventive war is not actually true. The argument that John Bolton made was that preventive war is a legal possibility. That's very different from saying it's the desired strategy, that it is the preferred policy choice. This is John Bolton we're going to see as the policymaker that we've never really had to see before, except maybe at the United Nations, where he did a lot of diplomacy. He did a lot of things that sort of went against the direct use of force. So we'll have to see what he's like as a policymaker, not as a news commentator.
Especially if you're publishing op-eds or giving speeches. These are forums, and they serve as a way to incite or provoke, sometimes very provocative arguments, sometimes to try to sway policy or to provoke a public debate. And they don't necessarily mean that it is exactly what it's going to be pursued. It also doesn't mean that it's once you go into a certain position.
President Trump reportedly said to John Bolton that before he announced his nomination or his position as National Security Advisor, please don't start any wars, suggesting that this is not going to be some reckless team. It will be a hard-line team. It will be a very serious team with Mike Pompeo and John Bolton surrounding Trump. But you know, Donald Trump doesn't have a lot of experience in international affairs, although he's been learning, obviously, on the job these past 14 months. This is a team he wants around him to know that he's not doing anything untoward about national interests. He's actually pursuing the national interest. So I see this as a relative good thing, that these are people, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, who can reach the president directly, and he'll listen to them.
So, and again, as my colleague said, I think these are people with very serious backgrounds and experience, and they are professionals, and I think they also understand their duties. And when you get into a position, so let's just wait and see what happens.
I see. Professor Hwang, South Korea's President Moon Jae-in suggested that a three-way summit may be possible between the two Koreas and the United States. Would this be in interest of the United States?
Well, I don't see why it wouldn't be, but again, I think that kind of question is way too early to even think about. I think we have to first see what happens if there is even a North-South summit. That is the first step, absolutely. If that is successful, if Kim Jong-un commits to denuclearization, as Moon Jae-in seems to be presenting, and if he shows this by, meaning North Korea shows this sincerely by no longer testing and so on, then we can move forward, and we have to see if it does produce a U.S. North Korea summit, and then possibly a three-way summit. I don't see why that would be bad. But I think it's too early to talk about a three-way summit.
Mr. Cronin, the upcoming negotiation with North Korea would involve serious concessions from all parties involved. What concessions is the United States ready to give to North Korea, do you think?
Well, the issue of concessions gets to the point that no country, no actor here actually wants to change its policy. So we're talking about summitry, and we're talking about triple summits and double summits and quadruple summits. The reality is that there's been no policy change of any significance taken by North Korea or the United States, and there's no trust there either. So I don't expect this to be a summit meeting, if it occurs, to be one about major concessions. I think it'd be more of a sort of a taking the temperature, testing the political will of the leader. Will President Trump think that Kim Jong-un has now personally taken a commitment to look at a path toward denuclearization? And if that's the case, then President Trump will, on a step-by-step basis, think about how to calibrate, no longer pressing too hard, maybe stopping the growth of the pressure on North Korea first. So it's not really a concession, it's more of just a pause or restraint. It depends. And then eventually, if there are concrete, verifiable steps on denuclearization, then I think you're willing to talk about things like sanctions relief and other issues that relieve the pressure.
Before we go, Professor Hwang, do you think North Korea is indeed willing to give up its nuclear weapons?
I sincerely doubt it. And the reason that I doubt it is I don't think it's actually about nuclear weapons. I think it's about securing what North Korea has always wanted. And that is not just regime survival, but about creating a Korean peninsula that is secure, but also independent from any kind of influence from any great power that surrounds it.
We'll end this discussion here and move on to our next topic.
Value this opportunity to arrange a meeting. We believe in dialogue and in the political process.
Explored approaches to building confidence and reducing tensions on the Korean Peninsula. It was planned well in advance.
North Korean diplomats met with former U.S. and South Korean officials in Finland this week. North Korea's foreign minister also traveled to Sweden for talks with Swedish officials. Now, Sweden represents U.S. diplomatic interest in North Korea. However, American officials say these talks aren't part of a process leading up to the summit between the U.S. and North Korea. Now, Mr. Cronin, let me begin with you. Why are North Korean diplomats all traveling to Europe and engage in these series of negotiations?
Well, let's assume that North Korean diplomats actually have some latitude for free discussion. I'm not sure that's the case. They may be seeking out possible gaps between international actors' opinion and the United States. They may be seeking to strengthen their diplomatic position heading into some very important summitry, a North-South summit, only the third ever, and possibly the first American-North Korean summit. Europe matters a lot. It matters because of the armistice, it matters because of the world economy, it matters because of the interests that are represented in terms of representation of North Korea actually having access. It could be the site of not just track 2, but even track 1 official dialogues. But I suspect that may take a while because we've never seen Kim Jong-un since December 2011 when his father died leave the country. And so going to Europe, well, maybe this will be one of his new approaches. He's certainly trying to change and turn heads since January 1 of this year. I suspect that may be difficult. So I think this is preparation for where is America, support for America, where's support for North Korea, what how can North Korea gain the maximum and give up the minimum?
Professor Hwang, the Swedish talks especially focused on the American detainees in North Korea. Is this the sign that North Korea is actually serious about coming to talks with the United States?
Well, it could possibly be. And I think if we see some movement on those U.S. detainees, that would be a very, very positive sign that a possible summit is moving forward. There is one very interesting point about this. President Trump, the one area in which he has been very consistent, actually in foreign policy, surprisingly for the last year and a half, is specifically speaking very consistently and strongly on North Korean human rights. This has been rather surprising, given that he's received a lot of criticism about not speaking out enough on human rights on other countries. And yet consistently on North Korea, he's spoken out on North Korean human rights. And that is actually one of the remaining obstacles to really being able to proceed with North Korea on any other issues.
What has been the role of European countries after the breakdown of the six-party talks?
Well, the Europeans, again, as my colleague has said, has played an interesting role. The Europeans offer a sort of a neutral space or place that the North Koreans can go to, that it does not involve a lot of history or politics aside from the regional neighbors. And so they've always actually held these kinds of 1.5 or track 2 dialogue. So it's actually not that unusual.
Mr. Cronin, now at a time when the United States and North Korea seems eager to actually directly engage with one another, where's the place for Europe in this dynamic?
Well, the Trump administration has heard repeatedly from a lot of friends in Europe that they would like to be a middleman and arrange discussions. And most of that has been slightly pushed to the side, but politely so, to encourage track 2 discussions and to encourage other communications with North Korea. But the White House wants to hear directly from North Korea. As you could understand, they want to know exactly what Kim Jong-un is promising, committing to, or not committing to, or not promising. So there is a role for Europe to play, and those communications will be appreciated and heard in Washington, but at the same time, they won't replace the need for direct talks. And if there's going to be progress, yes, releasing detainees would be a nice gesture as a first start. In fact, you could go back to the Iran deal that's been much vilified by the Trump administration, but nonetheless, it was the release of prisoners that actually opened up the aperture on diplomacy then. Europe played a big role then at the time as well.
Before we go, Professor Hwang, why are North Korean officials, government officials, engaged in unofficial track 2 meetings?
Oh, well, first of all, this is the way the system works. And frankly, this I think goes back, I mean, this is the way the Chinese system works. This is the way the North Korean system works. All the officials travel and all their think tank scholars are essentially government officials. So I don't think we should take too much into that.
We'll end this discussion here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, a time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. The photo today is a bike share service in Pyongyang. We have Capital Bike Share here in Washington, and in Pyongyang, it's called Yeongyang, meaning dawn. The bike share service started in January this year with 5 stations in central Pyongyang. Professor Hwang, what is your reaction?
Well, what I find fascinating about this is, I mean, this is essentially communist in its ideal form, right? You share assets. So this is fascinating. It also means that they are up on the latest kind of movements all around the globe, which is share riding.
Mr. Cronin?
Well, there's been a heavy move toward markets to relieve pressure and to kind of regulate what could happen in North Korea by the Kim regime. And I think this is another sort of symbolic step, perhaps, of trying to address popular desires without actually necessarily major reforms that are required. And I think this the Kim government is going to continue to have challenges if it negotiates in good faith, trying to open up the country without raising questions about the legitimacy of the Kim family regime.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Professor Hwang, Mr. Cronin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun Jang Cho. Thank you for watching.